Hey everyone. Yeah, thanks to Lisa for emceeing so well and for inviting me to talk about this. The title, this is sort of a rehash of a talk I've given before about how the ActivityPub protocol works, but I wanted to highlight some sort of ways in which Aaron or his work played some role in this, at least from my perspective, which I'll try to tell the story of. And yeah, basically what we're going to talk about is sort of social web history that happened like 10 years ago, the World Wide Web Consortium Social Web Working Group that standardized the ActivityPub and ActivityStreams protocols that are now at least sort of in use by this piece of open source software called Mastodon that's been in the news a lot. Talking about like, yeah, what the deal is with ActivityPub today and then where we could make it better in the future. So yeah, part one, history. Even like 15 or 20 years ago, there was this talk about like, or there was like an academic field called activity theory that was sort of like philosophical and also related to like human-computer interaction, but that's some of the precursors to what we now just like talk about as social web or social activity on the web. But that was like in the Cold War and also in the early 90s and stuff. In 1998, there was this blog post essentially that Tim Berners-Lee wrote that was called the Semantic Web Roadmap, where he basically talks about the idea of the web storing not just documents and web pages, but data and objects that are kind of like described by those documents into like a big web of data. Around that same time, there was also this article, this standard for that is the Resource Description Framework, or RDF. And you can see that even in 1998, when this kind of abstract data model called RDF was being talked about, one of the examples here is about a person named Sue who has a couple publications, one called The Anthology of Time, something about zoological reasoning. Like, even as far back as 1998, and in the description of this pretty abstract data model itself, one of the use cases that someone had in mind was for describing the relationships between humans and what they write and share with each other online. So where Aaron sort of came in was like not long after that. I never met him, but I was definitely inspired by this work as a kid. And if anyone's ever heard of RSS, there's a couple different things that acronym could mean. But one of them, according to this webpage, is RDF Site Summary. That is using the RDF abstract data model to summarize what's on a website, so that you could kind of like read it on a feed reader of your choice. There's some other acronyms that it could mean, like really simple syndication. And in making this talk, I realized that there's kind of like some sort of maybe battle for exactly what the acronym means. But RDF Site Summary is this one that Aaron had a role in, and you can see I think towards the bottom of the bottom left of this slide, pretty small, it says this document is maintained by Aaron Swartz on behalf of the RSS Dev Working Group. So that's cool. During this time of like 2005, soon after that, I would come home every day from school, kind of bored from class, but I would get to read all these RSS feeds from people all over the web and sort of learn things that they weren't going to teach me in school or that just like were interesting to me. And so that's kind of like what I considered like my golden years of getting to learn things on the web. And this is the Wikipedia page for the Linux RSS feed reader I used to use in my parents' basement. And also around 2005, after reading blogs for a while, I was like, maybe I could be a part of the social web. Maybe I have something to say. So I started blogging about Xboxes on this website that the archive, or the Wayback Machine has, but is no longer around, called gaming360.com. And you can see like at the bottom of that slide, it talks about the Gaming 360 Gamecast, which was our podcast. And so RSS ended up powering some of the early parts of podcasting and video podcasting too. So that was like when I got involved. Also, around the same time, Aaron was blogging, and I like vaguely remember, because it was quite a while ago, like Aaron's blog was one of the RSS feeds that my reader would pull in, and so especially back then, I would read pretty much anything that he posted. Around that, this is kind of a similar date to when I was doing Xbox stuff. Aaron was talking about moving to San Francisco and maybe doing a startup accelerator. And then not long after, like a year after that, is when this website called TWTR was getting off the ground. So you can see that back then, at least in the mid-2000s, there was blogging, this Twitter thing came out, but it was all people kind of co-creating the social web. Not long after that, there started to be an effort to like their continued effort to sort of standardize how do we talk about social data on the web. This is a little bit of history about the OAuth protocol, which this person named Blaine Cook helped make, who was an employee of Twitter at the time. And also around that time, Tim Berners-Lee started talking about this notion of the giant global graph, which even back then was sometimes referred to as Web 3.0, not explicitly to be confused with the Web 3 that a lot of people mean today. But whenever I heard Web 3 over the last couple of years, I was like, didn't I kind of read about this as a teenager a lot? And yeah, there's the .0, I guess, is the distinction. But yeah, this is around the same time. And soon after this talk of like Web 3.0 back then, some people started getting together and trying to standardize a social web using things like OAuth or OpenID or this activity streams work. And that this is like excerpts from a mailing at the time, the DESO project that was like distributed. Around the same time, there was new protocols and efforts to standardize like OpenID, OpenSocial. This was my blog as a 17-year-old. That's me in high school on, I think, like Disco Day or something, where I think it was powered by Tumblr, but I totally used like OpenID 2 and some other kind of server or protocol. So I was eating this stuff up as a teenager, trying to like integrate them on my blog as best I could. Yada yada. There's like more development on this sort of notion of like social activity streams. One thing that a lot of people don't remember, and you can't really find unless you use the archive, is that some of the early versions of the Facebook API platform actually use these activity streams, social data vocabulary. At the time, it was sort of XML and I think RDF based. And the first versions of Facebook's Open Graph, as well as like the MySpace APIs at the time, and even some Microsoft APIs, all actually had a kind of common data vocabulary for the social Web 2.0 type things they were starting to do. And at the same time, in the free software world, there were other projects like GNU Social or StatusNet or Pump.io that were all people trying to make either a non-interoperable social web product or increasingly like ways for these social products to sort of talk to one another. And yeah, this slide is just to like reiterate that in 2009, Google, Facebook, MySpace, Microsoft, and Yahoo all had implemented a social networking protocol that mostly interoperated, and like that's totally not where we're at right now. But that's how it was like not that long ago. And what happened? It kind of depends on who you ask, but this is like a strategy that comes to mind where like it kind of makes sense for new entrants into a market to use something like a standard to get adoption or like sort of piggyback off of like the existing incumbents. But if that works successfully, you've embraced some standard, maybe you can start to add a couple fancy features that only your implementation supports. And if you're the biggest implementation and you do some slightly non-standard stuff because you've made extensions, you can make moves to try to like extinguish the rest of the sort of competitive environment or cooperative environment and sort of have a monopoly for yourself. So I'm not saying that's like the only reason we're away from where we used to be, but it's something that comes to mind. Also around this time, some of the work that had happened in the Open Social Foundation that was largely like a Google-led effort got donated around the time like Google Buzz shut down, if you remember Google Buzz, to the W3C. And so I saw this RSS item come into my feed that some of this work that I'd been following on social web protocols was actually going to continue inside the World Wide Web Consortium, which I thought was really cool because that is the same standards body that worked on RSS back in the day and things like RDF and had made this thing called the web that I was really into and still am. So that's when I decided like, hey, maybe I could show up and try to be a part of some web standard, like they're pretty great. So as soon as I saw this blog post, there was a face-to-face meeting at Mozilla SF and I snuck in basically. And so that's when I got involved around 2013, at least as like a cheerleader. This is the wiki page on W3.org for that working group, the social web working group. Activity streams is one of the standards that group made, but there's also an ActivityPub is related, but there's some other ones that came out of it too that I think are also really cool, but don't get talked about quite as much yet. And this was the charter of the group. The charter of the group was to make basically a social data like syntax, so a way of describing social data on the web so that machines can read and parse out in a standard way. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is the slide I'm looking for. Social data syntax was one of the deliverables. A social API as well as a federation protocol. I think the distinction between the latter two was sort of like social API being something that like your Twitter client could be open source and talking to the equivalent of your Twitter server, sort of like a client to server API, whereas a federation protocol was a bit more about how different servers could talk to one another, kind of like how email works. So that was what this working group was tasked to do. And the result of the work, pretty much from like 2013 to finishing in 2018, were the things I'm about to talk about. One of them is called Activity Streams 2.0. Activity Streams 1.0 was this thing that as early as 2009, so even like 4 or 5 years before this, a bunch of companies, including Facebook and MySpace, had used. Activity Streams 2.0 is like very similar to that, but adds in a different JSON serialization. JSON is like pretty popular for web developers. And also added support for RDF as its abstract data model, which is what this @context thing sort of affords for at the top. You don't have to understand RDF to deal with activity streams, which is kind of hard to make work. But if you want to take advantage of some of the like more complicated ways of doing extensions or like linking to other ontologies for describing data on the web, that's like what it's there for. But yeah, that's activity streams. The core spec for activity streams sort of talks about like the base classes you could think of them you could think of them as like objects or actors or organizations or people, sort of like the base classes for things on the social web. And then there's this related document that's the full vocabulary document that describes all kinds of social activities or different kinds of actors on the web. So there's some pretty small text there, but there's basically different social activity types for like accepting or like inviting someone to a group, joining a room, like giving an offer to someone, asking a question, you know, all the some like sort of common denominator for what a lot of social websites do. And again, you can use RDF to make extensions or define new things without having to go through any sort of like central committee or bureaucracy. And yeah, on the right, it also talks about different object types like a video, a document, an event, a note, a place, etc. And like a mention, as a common paradigm in social web apps, you would like @mention someone. There's a way of describing like mentions in a thing too. So that's activity streams. That's a social data syntax. And then ActivityPub makes use of activity streams as the data vocabulary, as a syntax, but as a networked protocol for sending those social activities around the web. And like this diagram on the bottom right is in the spec itself. It's like a surprisingly readable spec. So I encourage you to take a look at it. But honestly, it works a lot, like very, very much like email. Every actor on the ActivityPub sort of social web has an inbox and an outbox. When you want to post something, you can post something to your outbox, at which point the server that hosts that outbox will like do the ActivityPub protocol to replicate the social objects to the people that need to find out about them. And then if someone else posts something on their server or on their node that you need to find out about, they will post into their outbox. The logic of the ActivityPub protocol will tell their outbox to deliver something to your inbox, and then you can open your device and see what's in your inbox to sort of have like, just like an email inbox, a list of things that are probably relevant to you that you want to find out. Unlike email, it uses, in practice, JSON almost all the time. I think it would have been interesting if we would have used even more email, but it really is pretty simple to grok if you use email, and most people do. Let's see, this talks about a part of ActivityPub, which are actors. So that's like the term for like any person or organization or club or something or toaster that's on the social web would have an actor, and it's based on this older computer science idea of the actor model that turns out to be really useful for modeling distributed systems. This also zooms in on a part of the ActivityPub protocol that kind of is related to the social web as we usually know it. There's specific descriptions for how you should model like the set of things following an actor, followers, or your followees, or maintaining a collection of the things that have been liked by a given actor or shared. So this kind of gives you a window into the different kind of the aspects of the protocol that model like common social web activities, things like blocking people, undoing things that you didn't mean to do, et cetera. And there's like there's defined processing rules for example, what should happen if your server receives like a block activity or an undo activity. One of the things I want to highlight is that like ActivityPub was pretty arduous to get standardized. It also sort of wrapped up in 2018. There's a lot of things that like I definitely would do differently if I knew what I knew now. And also we still can do differently because there's no reason we can't like make these protocols better or learn from their what they what they didn't do. One of the things is security. And I put that in quotes because basically ActivityPub doesn't say that much about how to do security or that much cryptography stuff. There's some affordances, some things you can use to add like cryptographic signatures, but in practice there's not like really strong normative text on an implementation of ActivityPub has to do the crypto in these ways. So that's something that like could be improved in the future, but back then the idea was like, just use something like OAuth 2 and that'll probably be good. I think that's something we should revisit going forward and make more advanced. There's another document that I think doesn't get enough love that came out of that working group that's called the Social Web Protocols by Dr. Amy Guy, that because there were so many sort of different protocols being worked on or documents being worked on, it wasn't obvious how they fit together. This document is a really good overview of the work in that working group that describes the different social web protocols and compares and contrasts some of them. You can see how it looks at like the different things from the charter on this axis and some of the different protocols and standards that we were working on and sort of where they fit in. So that's a good place to dive in if you want to. And then some people over the last few years have also heard more and more about a project by Tim Berners-Lee called the Solid Project that originally started in his decentralized information group at MIT around like 2014. And they work pretty well together by way of both using this RDF abstract data model. You can use things described using Solid's RDF vocabulary and sort of mix and match those with documents describing using the activity of the other like hundreds of vocabularies out there. And they kind of co-evolved. Like Solid was at the time especially not in a W3C working group. It was sort of like on the side innovating as fast as possible. But I think even back then there was something in the README where on the Solid README that said, anything the social web working group does, we're just going to use that, and we're going to try to only solve problems that the social web working group like isn't going to take on. And so there was sort of a natural symbiotic relationship. But I made this slide a few months ago. Actually, I saw on the mailing list like a week or two ago that Tim has now like initiated things to have there be a solid working group in W3C, which I think is a good idea. So maybe he was just playing the long game on all that. But they work together fairly well, or like in theory they can at least. Okay, so that's sort of look through the history books. Where's ActivityPub at today? This is a repo you can go look at that seems to be aggregating a bunch of awesome ActivityPub projects. There are a lot of them. One of the more popular ones is called Mastodon. A lot of people have been adopting it over the last week or two. I saw a stat from the lead dev that like 1 million new accounts have started using Mastodon in the last week or two, at least from his numbers, which are not complete, and like 600,000 accounts that had previously been created but were not active have been active over the last couple of weeks. So there's like 1.5 million people that are sort of diving in or rediving into Mastodon over the last couple of weeks. It's written in Ruby on Rails, and it actually existed before this protocol that I just described like came out. So it implements a couple different protocols, including ActivityPub. This is what it looks like. Kind of looks like Twitter. Instead of tweeting, you toot things, which I think is funny, but that might get renamed, I read. And then what's kind of great, like this all felt like kind of fun, just like silly hacking, like let's make an open source version of Twitter that's decentralized. Like at least that's how I looked at it back in the day. I was like, this just seems like a fun thing to get up to. And this weird thing started happening like 2017, 2018, at least from my perspective, which was like the EU showed up and was really interested and started as part of their larger next generation internet initiative, which is like a public funding initiative for European technologists. They took notice and started like basically printing euros and funding open source hackers to work in the space. And then earlier this year, like beginning of this year, Europe launched like the official ActivityPub server of the European Union, which is on the left. It's like social.network.europa.eu. And you can actually go and follow, I think this is what the right shows a different one, but you can go on the Europe one and basically follow like the high privacy court of Europe, or like 100 different European agencies, and follow from the European server, but get their notifications delivered to whichever ActivityPub inbox you choose. So that kind of blew my mind as soon as I was following like a government agency on these like decentralized social network. And then earlier this week, I learned that the Internet Archive is launching is hosting a Mastodon instance now. That's like mastodon.archive.org. So you can follow the archive or Brewster or probably a bunch of other nice people on there. And again, even though these are two different servers we're looking at that each hosts their own account, I, using a personal server of my choice or a friend's, can follow accounts across both of these. So everything, you're not stuck in one silo. Like if you are deciding whether you should follow your friend on Twitter or Facebook, you can follow your friend on whatever server they're on. That's sort of the point. This constellation of different servers that sort of talk to each other through protocols like ActivityPub or Activity Streams or other like decentralized social protocols make up this sort of amorphous concept called the Fediverse that like I didn't come up with. I think it's a cool word. It has a Wikipedia page. It has a pretty logo. But I encourage people to sort of like read this Wikipedia page and see whether it calls to them. I personally think it's cool that it's like a big tent idea for people that want interoperable social web, but without necessarily like shilling any one protocol or saying that there has to be like one right way of doing this. So it's sort of a loose collection of protocols. And let's see, on the top right, I'm showing other Mastodon servers. The top one here is social.coop, which is really cool. It shows how like there's a lot of people operating nodes in the Fediverse that are not for-profit companies. Social Co-op is like a co-op registered in the UK, which has a long history of cooperative organizational structures. I learned about HCI.social this week, which is like Princeton's Human-Computer Interaction Department somehow is like coming together to host a bunch of HCI scholars on HCI.social. And then another, this is Ethan Zuckerman, earlier this week, who has a lab at, I believe, UMass Amherst around digital public infrastructure and is starting to use a fork of Mastodon, I believe, in the context of like the civic discourse of the municipal government of Amherst. And I mostly think it's cool that we have this federated universe of organizations that are not just sort of big tech companies and are not just nonprofits or just co-ops or just municipal governmental structures. All of these things can sort of flourish and still talk to each other even though they have different things they're trying to optimize for. Okay, and I will wrap it up in part 4. So what the future of ActivityPub? Like this is all great. I think it's amazing that anyone uses this at all, but there's a lot of things that can be like really, really improved about ActivityPub and the specific implementations like Mastodon. So there's like the protocol level, which can be really flexible, and then there's these specific apps like Mastodon that only expose like a subset of what can be done. And here's how we could shift things going forward. Like anyone can make an extension to ActivityPub, so like defining a new activity type or a new object type or maybe new fields that you don't see in the vocabulary. Because it uses RDF as its abstract data model, that can be done in a relatively like permissionless way. Like anyone that can make a web page can make an extension. You don't have to come and ask permission, which is pretty sweet. There's a wiki page on W3org about like ActivityPub extensions ideas. As far as I know, there's no like official extensions, but part of that is like by design. Anyone can just go and make an extension, just make a new RDF property or class or something and mix it in using JSON-LD. This is an example of not creating an extension, but mashing up the activity streams like vocabulary with this other ontology I learned about this week called the Scientific Evidence and Provenance Information Ontology, SEPIO. That's like 10 or 15 years old. And I learned about this from this conference in the lower right that's happening like literally as we speak. And what's cited in a talk yesterday, I noticed, that's the ACM Conference on Computer-Supported Cooperative Work and Social Computing. And there's people that aren't me that are talking about using ActivityPub in there combined with sort of other ontologies that model the scientific discourse and synthesis of new knowledge. And this on the left is like a hack I whipped up the other day that shows how like you could use the activity streams vocabulary or the ActivityPub protocol for someone to ask a question, like a scientific question, but then someone in response can answer, which is defined by activity streams, but they can answer with a assertion object. They can sort of respond and be like, this is an answer, but it's also a specific kind of answer. It's like a scientific assertion. Here's the line of evidence. Here's the evidence items. At least in the data model, we can describe the mashup of both the silly sort of Q&A social stuff with this pretty deep ontology for modeling like reasoning and evidence chains and stuff like that. So that shows how to mash up. Something that I want to see more of in the future is people mashing up activity streams with other ontologies, either like ones they make or ones that other people have already made. And here's some other hand-wavy possible futures, like ActivityPub, at least as it's authored, it had HTTP or HTTPS transport in mind for like how a lot of the the data goes around, but there's not a really good reason it needs to stay that way. We could totally be passing activity streams around over something like libp2p, which can run over Bluetooth or LoRaWAN or something like that, or MDNS, sort of transport agnostic. Leveraging other efforts like the RDF dataset canonicalization and hashing working group, which is a new W3C working group, to add basically like signatures for data integrity and authenticity into the same knowledge graphs that represent these like toots and question and answers. Different ways of basically doing content addressing for the social objects, which can like be useful for sort of peer-to-peer or offline first environments. Because we use activity streams uses RDF, any sort of URL can make its way, or URI can make its way into the data. And there's this new kind of URI that just got standardized in W3C called the decentralized identifier URI scheme. So we could mix up some decentralized identifiers in there. And then there's some different security models like capability-based security that are probably a good idea to mix in for like complicated use cases. Yeah. You're a fan of capability-based security? Excellent. Yeah, me too. So related work I just want to highlight, because this is, like I said, not the end-all be-all. There's some other stuff. Like we need to all sort of work together and learn from these different efforts. Blue Sky is a project and company that has a pretty good mandate to make a decentralized social networking protocol that will be using DIDs, at least according to their latest publication. Keep an eye on what they're doing. They put a really good team together and are moving really fast. Publishing some stuff. They released a protocol like 2 or 3 weeks ago called the app protocol that you should look at. A solid project I mentioned that Tim Berners-Lee's been working on is really great. Christine, who is like the lead editor on the ActivityPub spec, is working on a capability-based security project called Sprightly that was talked about in a previous talk. Definitely go look at that. I think it's really exciting. And then, yeah, like I made this slide like 6 months ago, but yeah, this is relevant to current events by way of different social networks being acquired. And the other thing I wanted to highlight in the context of like current events is the European Union Digital Markets Act, which I believe will like start to have some teeth that go into effect 6 months from now or so. But there's basically clauses in European law where they're, just like with GDPR, adding disincentives to not do privacy by design type things. There are some clauses that go into effect in about 6 months in Europe that will start to have disincentives for having social features on your website that don't have interoperable like ways of working with other websites. And so it doesn't explicitly mention ActivityPub, but we might see the regulatory landscape of Silicon Valley being affected by these European laws, just like it happened with GDPR, that are sort of like legislating interoperability, and these are some ways in which you might want to do that. You can get started poking at this by getting on a Mastodon server. There's a bunch to choose from. Joinmastodon.org down here in the bottom right is a place that lists a bunch of them. These are 2 apps that I use that are not made by that nonprofit, but one is called Toot, that it works pretty well on iPhone, and I also really like this desktop-based app on the top right if you have like a laptop-based monitor you want to see more things on. And you can follow me when you join. And I kind of wanted to just wrap this with these 2 slides here of like harkening back to Brewster's post from approximately 2015 that talked about locking the web open and the importance of making a re-decentralizing the web. And I think like a sub part of that is locking the social web open. Like we have current events make this as good of a time as any to kind of move off of centralized social web providers and move to like more decentralized solutions, or at least go kick the tires on them. Let's make the most of that. Let's go try things out. And if they're working even sort of good, like use them and tell your friends. We may not get another chance that's nearly this good to sort of lock the social web open. And if we can do that, we're on the right track for what Brewster wants us to do, which is lock the whole web open. And so the last slide here is just thanking Aaron for his work on RSS, blogging, all kinds of things he did that inspired us all, including me, and as well as the authors and people who contributed to the ActivityPub spec who are listed on this slide. So thank you very much. Come find me if you have any questions.
All right. And do we have questions? All right. It's from Eric at SecureDrop.
Hey, thanks so much for the talk. I'm actually curious how many folks in the audience have a Mastodon account already. Could you raise your hand?
That's what I like to see.
Cool. So yeah, that's a good number. I just want to underscore something you said. Like, this is a really, really important moment in history where we have a chance to individually, through our choices, actually shift the landscape in a pretty important way. Twitter is collapsing, it's rotting, it's being neglected systematically. It's a good time to make a shift. So if you are interested in actually trying it out, check out Mastodon, make an account there. I am here still for another 90 minutes or so. I'm happy to help anyone who wants to get started. I don't know about you, Ben, if you want to offer any assistance, but yeah, if you want to give it a try, please give it a try, and we're happy to help. I do have a question on the scalability front. So we are seeing like big names migrate to Mastodon, like Greta Thunberg, you know, like people with millions of followers. I don't think the network is anywhere near prepared for the sort of scale that we're seeing now in terms of the number of followers and the size of the social graph that is developing around these folks. So let's say like a Stephen King joins Mastodon because Elon pisses him off in some way. Not unlikely to happen. So you've got a person with like 100 million followers who joins the network, joins some random server that might not be set up for an account with 100 million followers. I'm curious if there has been any sort of initial work towards greater scalability of the network, reducing the cost of operating an ActivityPub server where an individual actor might have like millions of followers on other servers distributed, of course, across like potentially thousands of different servers, like routing those requests more effectively, just managing the scaling of the network in a more systematic way that doesn't have cost explode for individual server operators.
Yeah, I think the question was like sort of is there work on scaling the network, and I find my brain going to like there's Mastodon is a specific piece of code, like a small distributed system that's scaling Mastodon, and then there's sort of like maybe protocol level changes or best practices that could be defined to scale like the protocol Fediverse. I don't really know that much about either, especially like the Mastodon code base stuff, but I would defer to them. On the protocol front, like I would look to basically there's been a couple ActivityPub confs where some people have shown up and given talks about things in that space. So like anyone that's curious for the bleeding edge of sort of the scaling the protocol type thing could go watch some of those talks. If there was like a very good silver bullet, I would tell you. I think that it's the way I think about it is just like in a giant global graph of peer-to-peer everything, like things are going to be a little bit slower. There's these trade-offs between like performance that we're used to from Web 2 systems and resilience or decentralization that we also want for good reasons. And so like, you know, there's not necessarily a silver bullet. We all need to just like make good choices that are appropriate for us around whether we really need like 2-second latency or 1-second latency or half a second latency, or whether we really need pure decentralization or our friend server, or we really need to self-host our own thing. And like, there's no silver bullet. But I think it's like a good question. And it's one of the things that keeps me up at night is that like we have a really good opportunity right now. There are a bunch of things that are going to go wrong as for people who like shouldn't have to care about the tech, and it may mean that we like miss that moment and have to show up for the next one. But that's how shit gets done. You know, like, that's how we build things out. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, I have a question, because this is what I was interrogating you on Signal about, just in terms of migrating. How do we can set up a Mastodon account. I could get different answers from people about what server should I use? Do the servers really talk to each other? That kind of thing. So that's my first question. Does it matter what server I pick?
I mean, yeah. I wish it didn't matter, but it does. At the very least, what you're doing if you're using a server from someone that you don't know is like you're trusting that they're going to be able to keep it up, and that's a multi-dimensional thing. It's like you're assuming they can afford to keep it up, that they have the technical know-how to scale it if like a bunch of, you know, if it gets DDoSed or something. And you're also just like, even if something's gonna work for a year or two, is it gonna be permanent? Is it gonna like keep working several years down the line? Like, I kind of just know, like, trust that like nothing is permanent and everything will go down.
I'm confused by that because it's supposed to be a decentralized system, so why does it matter which server I pick to start? It's just starting with, right? Aren't I on all the federated servers?
Yeah, like, I think it kind of comes down to like a case-by-case basis, but I do think that one of the protocol things that we like can and should make much better is There is already something, I believe, in the protocol for, like, if I went to check on your actor at whatever server you chose, and you had moved to a new server, a way that the old server can sort of point to your new location. That's really helpful.
So if it goes down, something could still
It's like if they're up, but don't want to be hosting your actor anymore, or if you move to a new account.
What about when they go down?
If they go down, this is a big problem.
It's just over?
So one of the things I think that the community should be doing is
the Internet
maybe
Archive does have a
help
Mastodon server
is
now.
basically
Good point.
providing like a good playbook for instances that need to go down for one reason or another. So like one of them is called Mastodon Technology that went down like 4 or 5 weeks ago. The admin of it worked his butt off for many years hosting this node for a bunch of people, and then family got sick, his bank accounts were getting drained, and he just like couldn't afford to do it anymore. And I think that the community could have a better solution for like helping those people point the domain to a place that keeps things up long enough to help the members of that server move along. But that doesn't currently exist. So if anyone wants to like work on that.
If you back up your account and the server goes down, then you don't lose everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, backing up always helps, but we also want to make sure that like if I print on my business card my identifier on the social web, and then that server goes down, that in a perfect world, I wouldn't even have to like reprint my business card or give a new identifier to all my friends.
It would just be somewhere else.
They'd be able to go fetch the old location. It would point to my new location, which might point to a new location.
Okay.
And everything would work. But that's.
But one way you might not lose all your shit if a server goes down is to be backing it up.
That sounds like a good idea.
Right? Okay, because that's one of the answers that I got. And yeah, actually, the Internet Archive, we like to think, is never going away, and is probably maybe a good place to start. And they'll also play by the rules in terms of federating, in terms of letting other places connect to them and doing this pointer thing and stuff like that. The other thing was, you said something about RSS feeds for being able to take my followers with me or my tweets with me or something. What was all that about?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
Okay. I don't remember exactly what you're referring to.
Well, it was something about how it was able to, there could have an RSS feed of my Twitter feed that could somehow contribute to my Mastodon.
I think if anything, I meant to just sort of illustrate that, like, especially by way of RDF, this sort of RSS feels in a lot of ways like a precursor or like prior art to what ActivityPub does, in being like an RDF-based serialization for stuff happening on the web that you can sort of aggregate.
There is that website though. Was it you that showed me? Knitter, or there's something where it shows you all of your Twitter feeds but without all the crap.
That it wasn't me. That was someone else. But that
does anyone
sounds
know
cool.
what I'm talking about? What's it called? Knitter. But with an N. Oh, okay.
Sounds
so
cool.
Knitter was an idea. Okay. So just to double check, I know I keep asking the same kind of questions. There's no way to bring my followers with me. There's no way to, I guess the only way is to tell them all that I've got this Mastodon account now on Twitter.
Yeah.
Which is why people are doing it.
There's a couple tools that you can use, I don't remember the name of them, that will like, you will connect via OAuth to Twitter and connect via OAuth to a ActivityPub server. It'll try to find some matches that are on both and help make it easier to follow you. But there's
what tool is that?
I don't remember the name. I would search like Twitter, Mastodon.
There's a tool called Debirdify. Yes, it's a pretty good name. And yeah, if you could just Google Debirdify, that's the one. And what it does, like you said, is it basically looks for links to your Mastodon account in your followers' Twitter bios, and it actually is very, very good. Like I've been running it like every couple of days in the last week, and every day I find like 15 new people. Yeah, it's really, really good.
The community tool I use a lot is this one called Moa that I really love, is Moa Party, which will watch my Mastodon account and watch my Twitter account and replicate things back and forth. So like practically speaking, if I want to publish something socially, I can pull out and I can use either the Twitter iOS app or the Mastodon one, whichever one I use. Like the content will go to that place, it will get syndicated to the other place. I've had cases of like being on Twitter, retweeting something, it gets pulled through Moa Party over to my Mastodon account, which gets federated to a different Mastodon server, and then someone replies over there. So there's all these kind of like emergent kind of like information behaviors that can happen with tools like Moa replicating
a
things.
Wonderfully useful, redundant kind of system that would be perfect for this kind of migratory historical time. And it's really funny, yeah, Twitters have become bird accounts. Like, it's, yeah, I just saw that for the first time, a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, bird account? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was really great, Ben. Thank you.